The ground beneath Thea Randall's feet crumbled away as the stagecoach careened over the edge of the ravine, her screams lost in the thunderous crack of breaking wood and the terrified whinnies of the horses. In that moment, suspended between life and death, the 22-year-old never imagined that this would be the day everything changed, the day her worth would be measured by a scar that ran from temple to chin. Silver City, New Mexico Territory, 1873, was not a forgiving place for a woman with a ruined face. 3 months had passed since that fateful day. Thea stood at the small, cracked mirror in her rented room above the Silver City General Store, her trembling fingers tracing the angry red line that had forever altered her future. The wound had healed as well as could be expected, Dr. Sawyer had said, but the scar remained vivid and unmistakable. A permanent reminder of the accident that had claimed 5 lives and nearly her own. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, bathing the modest room in golden light. Outside, the bustling sounds of the mining town came to life. Wagon wheels on packed dirt, the distant clang of picks against stone, voices calling out greetings as Silver City awakened to another day of possibility. But for Thea, possibility seemed like a cruel joke. "You need to be realistic," Mrs. Hargrove had told her yesterday, not unkindly, when Thea inquired about continuing her position as a schoolteacher. The children would be frightened. The parents have concerns, as though her face might somehow corrupt their precious offspring. As though teaching arithmetic and letters required unblemished beauty. Thea closed her eyes against the memory, fighting back tears that she had sworn she wouldn't shed today. Crying wouldn't pay for her room or put food in her belly. And with her savings dwindling, she needed work, any work, before she was forced to write that humiliating letter to her aunt in Boston. A sharp knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Randall, are you decent?" It was Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife who managed the rooms above the store. "Yes, come in," Thea called, quickly adjusting her high-necked blouse. Mrs. Peterson entered, her round face flushed from climbing the stairs. "I've just had word from the Lucky Strike. They're looking for someone to help with cleaning and cooking for the miners' boarding house. It ain't proper work for a lady teacher, but—" Her eyes darted to Thea's scar, then quickly away. "Well, beggars can't be choosers in these parts." The sting of the woman's words was no less painful for being true. Thea swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'll go inquire right away." The older woman nodded, relief evident in her features. "Best hurry. Jobs don't last long in Silver City." After Mrs. Peterson left, Thea donned her best and only hat, angling it carefully to cast a shadow over the damaged side of her face. The Lucky Strike mine was on the outskirts of town, a good 20-minute walk under the relentless New Mexico sun. By the time she arrived, perspiration dampened her collar, and dust coated her boots and the hem of her simple blue dress. The boarding house was a long, low building of weathered wood, with a sagging porch and windows clouded with grime. The foreman, a barrel-chested man named Simmons, looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. "You're the schoolteacher." It wasn't a question. "I was," Thea replied, standing straighter. "I'm seeking new employment," he grunted. "Can you cook?" "Yes. Clean, of course." "And you don't mind hard work?" "These men expect their meals hot and on time, their beds made, and their shirts washed weekly." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Simmons." He squinted at her, his gaze finally settling on her scar. "The boys can be rough around the edges, crude. They'll stare." "People always stare," Thea said, the words coming out more bitterly than she'd intended. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. $5 a week plus room and board in the back of the house. Sundays off. You start tomorrow." Relief washed through her. It wasn't teaching, but it was honest work, and more importantly, it meant she could remain independent. "Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I'll be here at first light." The walk back to town felt lighter despite the heat of the day. Thea even allowed herself to stop at Hendrick's Mercantile to purchase a small square of chocolate, a luxury she hadn't permitted herself since the accident. Mr. Hendricks wrapped it carefully in paper, his kindly eyes avoiding her scar with practiced diligence. "Heard you got work up at the Lucky Strike," he said, handing her the parcel. "News traveled fast in Silver City." "Word gets around quick," he nodded. "Just be careful up there. Miners are a different breed. Rough types." He hesitated. "You might want to keep to yourself." "I always do," Thea replied, tucking the chocolate into her pocket. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a tall figure entering the store. Strong hands caught her shoulders to steady her, and Thea found herself looking way up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Beg pardon, madam," the man said, quickly releasing her. "Didn't see you there." He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with broad shoulders, sun-bronzed skin, and sandy hair that curled slightly beneath his well-worn Stetson. A cowboy, judging by his attire and the faint smell of leather and horses that clung to him. Thea instinctively angled her face away, presenting her unmarked profile. No harm done. But as she tried to step past him, he shifted, bringing her scar into his line of sight. She waited for the familiar reaction, the quickly masked shock, the pity, the discomfort. Instead, he smiled, a genuine smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "You headed back to town. Road's mighty dusty today." Confused by his normal response, Thea merely nodded. "Flynn Blackwell," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I'm foreman over at the Rocking Bee, just north of here." "Thea Randall," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her name. The last thing she needed was another person's charity or, worse, mockery. "Miss Randall," he acknowledged. "Hope our paths cross again." Before she could respond, he moved past her to speak with Mr. Hendricks about an order of supplies. Thea hurried out, unsettled by the encounter. Flynn Blackwell was either unusually kind or, more likely, he wanted something. Men always wanted something, especially from women they perceived as vulnerable or desperate. And Thea Randall was neither. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a brief respite before the desert heat would settle in. Thea arrived at the Lucky Strike boarding house just as the first miners were heading to their shift, their faces still puffy with sleep, tin coffee cups clutched in grimy hands. Mrs. Dalton, a sour-faced widow who had been managing the house, spent precisely 1 hour showing Thea the kitchen, the storeroom, and the endless list of duties, before announcing she was catching the afternoon stage to her sister's home in Albuquerque. "Good riddance to the lot of them," were her parting words. "Filthy, ungrateful swine, the whole bunch." By midday, Thea understood the woman's bitterness. The kitchen was a disaster, the pantry infested with mice, and the miners' quarters smelled of unwashed bodies and stale tobacco. But there was something almost comforting about the physical labor, the straightforward tasks of scrubbing and organizing that required no charm or beauty, just diligence and strength. When the afternoon shift returned, hungry and tired, Thea had managed to prepare a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and stewed beef. The men filed in, 23 of them, their curious glances at her scar quickly replaced by appreciation for the hot food that awaited them. "Best meal we've had in months," declared one older miner, helping himself to seconds. "The old bat never seasoned nothing properly." "Ain't polite to speak ill of the departed, Grady," another miner said with a wink at Thea. "Even if she did cook like she was trying to poison us all." Thea found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. "I'm glad it meets with your approval." As the men ate, she learned their names, their preferences, their stories. Most were single men drawn to Silver City by the promise of silver and the dream of striking it rich. A few were married with families in town. All were hardworking, and while some eyed her scar with curiosity, none seemed repulsed by it. By the end of her first week, Thea had established a routine. Up before dawn to start breakfast, cleaning and laundry throughout the morning, preparation for the midday meal, then baking and planning for the evening as the afternoon progressed. In between, she managed to scrub the kitchen to a shine, organize the pantry, and even plant a small herb garden behind the house. It was on a supply run to town that she encountered Flynn Blackwell again. She was leaving Hendrick's Mercantile with a basket of goods when he rode up, dismounting from a handsome chestnut gelding with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Miss Randall," he greeted her, that same genuine smile lighting his features. "Fancy meeting you here again." "Mr. Blackwell," she acknowledged, trying to keep her tone neutral. He was undeniably attractive, but Thea had learned the hard way that handsome faces often concealed ugly intentions. "That looks mighty heavy," he observed, nodding to her basket. "May I offer you a ride back to wherever you're headed?" "The Lucky Strike boarding house," she replied, "but I can manage." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You're working for Simmons now." "I cook and clean for the miners," Thea said, lifting her chin. "It's honest work." "Never suggested otherwise," Flynn said easily. "My sister runs our ranch house with an iron fist and the heart of a saint. No harder worker in the territory." The mention of his sister surprised Thea. It was such a normal conversation without the undercurrent of pity or disgust she'd grown accustomed to. It threw her off balance. "Still," Flynn continued, "that's a fair walk with a heavy load. My horse won't mind the company." Perhaps it was the sincerity in his voice or simply the prospect of the long, hot walk ahead, but Thea found herself nodding. "Thank you. That's very kind." He helped her onto the horse first, then swung up behind her with practiced ease, careful to maintain a respectful distance as he reached around to take the reins. The ride to the Lucky Strike was mostly silent, but not uncomfortably so. Thea was acutely aware of his presence, the solid strength of him at her back, the gentle way he guided the horse, the clean scent of soap that suggested he'd made an effort to be presentable for his trip to town. When they arrived at the boarding house, Flynn dismounted first, then offered his hand to help her down. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that Thea firmly attributed to the heat of the day. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Blackwell," she said formally. "Flynn," he corrected with a smile. "Mr. Blackwell was my father and a far more serious man than I'll ever be." Despite herself, Thea smiled back. "Then thank you, Flynn." He tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Randall." As he turned to leave, Thea found herself calling after him. "It's Thea." "If we're dispensing with formalities." Flynn's smile widened, creating small crinkles around his eyes that Thea found inexplicably charming. "Thea, then. Good day to you." She watched him ride away, puzzled by the encounter. Flynn Blackwell didn't fit neatly into her understanding of people in Silver City. He was neither repulsed by her appearance nor overly solicitous. He simply treated her like a person, a normal woman worthy of common courtesy. It was refreshing and dangerous. Thea couldn't afford to develop feelings for anyone, let alone a handsome cowboy who was probably just being neighborly. She had built walls around herself for good reason, walls that protected her from the cruelty of others, but also from her own hopes. Hopes that had been crushed beneath the wheels of that stagecoach as surely as her face had been scarred by its splintering wood. Over the next few weeks, Thea fell into a comfortable rhythm at the Lucky Strike. The miners, rough men though they were, treated her with a gruff respect that bordered on protectiveness. She learned their stories. Grady, who had lost his wife in childbirth and sent money home to the daughter being raised by his sister. Young Pete, barely 20, who dreamed of saving enough to start a cattle ranch. One-eyed Jack, who claimed to have been a pirate before the lure of silver brought him inland. They didn't seem to see her scar anymore, or if they did, they didn't care. To them, she was simply Miss Thea, the woman who made sure their beds were clean, their clothes were washed, and their bellies were full. But Silver City was a small town, and Thea couldn't avoid the stares and whispers when she ventured into its center. The women were the worst, not the working girls from the saloons, who had their own hardships to bear, but the respectable wives and daughters who viewed her as a cautionary tale. The once promising schoolteacher, now reduced to serving minors, the pretty girl whose prospects had literally been carved away. "Such a shame," she overheard Mrs. Donovan say to Mrs. Peterson one Saturday as Thea selected fabric for a new apron. "She had such potential before the accident. Now she's practically worthless on the marriage market. No man wants damaged goods." "Hush, Beatrice," Mrs. Peterson had replied, but her tone held agreement rather than rebuke. Worthless. The word echoed in Thea's mind as she made her purchases and hurried back to the boarding house. Was that all a woman amounted to? Her value measured only by her marriageability, her worth determined by the smoothness of her skin. That night, alone in her small room at the back of the boarding house, Thea allowed herself a rare moment of self-pity. She stood before her small mirror, unflinchingly examining her scar in the lamplight. It was still an angry red, puckered slightly at the edges where Dr. Sawyer's stitches had pulled the skin together. In time, he'd said, it would fade to silver white, but it would never disappear. A knock at her door startled her from her contemplation. "Miss Thea," it was young Pete's voice. "Sorry to bother you, but there's a fella here to see you." Curious and a bit apprehensive, Thea quickly tied a scarf around her head in a way that partially obscured her scar. "Who is it, Pete?" "Says his name's Flynn Blackwell. From the Rocking Bee, Flynn. What could he possibly want at this hour? Tell him I'll be right out." When she emerged into the common room, Flynn stood by the cold fireplace, hat in hand. The miners who weren't on night shift were gathered at the long table playing cards, but all eyes turned to her as she entered. "Miss Randall," Flynn greeted her, and Thea noted he'd reverted to formality in front of the miners. "I apologize for the late call." "Is everything all right, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, conscious of the curious glances from the men. "Fine, yes. I was hoping I might have a word with you. Outside, perhaps." The miners exchanged knowing looks that made Thea's cheeks warm. She nodded and followed Flynn onto the porch, where the evening air had cooled to a comfortable temperature and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced," Flynn began, turning to face her. In the fading light, his features were softened, making him appear younger than his years. "But I've come with a proposition." Thea stiffened, her guard immediately rising. "What sort of proposition?" Flynn must have sensed her wariness, for he quickly added, "A professional one. You see, our cook at the Rocking Bee quit last week, decided to follow the gold rush rumors up to Colorado. We've been making do, but my sister is run ragged trying to manage the house and the meals for 15 cowboys." "And you thought of me," Thea said slowly. "Your reputation as a cook has spread," Flynn said with a smile. "The Lucky Strike boys can't stop bragging about your apple pies and biscuits." Despite herself, Thea felt a flutter of pride. "I'm contracted to Mr. Simmons." "I've already spoken with him," Flynn admitted. He wasn't happy, but I offered to find him a replacement, and I'm prepared to offer you $8 a week, plus room and board. Better quarters. 2, a proper bedroom in the main house, not some closet behind the kitchen. Thea blinked in surprise. $8 was a considerable improvement, and the thought of a real bedroom was tempting. But something didn't add up. Why me, Mr. Blackwell? Surely there are other cooks in Silver City. Flynn's gaze was steady, honest. None with your skills or reputation for hard work. And my sister, Tessa, she's been asking after you specifically. Your sister knows me. Knows of you, he clarified. She was impressed when I mentioned how you've transformed the Lucky Strike, said any woman who could make that lot of miners act civilized must be something special. Something special. When was the last time anyone had used those words to describe her? Before the accident, certainly. Before she became poor Thea with the ruined face. I'd need to give Mr. Simmons proper notice, she said, surprised to hear herself considering the offer. Flynn's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Of course. Would a week be sufficient? Thea nodded, still unsure why she was agreeing. The Lucky Strike was a known quantity. The miners respected her, and she had carved out a place for herself here. The Rocking Bee was an unknown, and Flynn Blackwell, with his kind eyes and easy smile, was perhaps the biggest unknown of all. Then it's settled, Flynn said, extending his hand. Welcome to the Rocking Bee, Miss Randall. Thea hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from ranch work. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Blackwell. Flynn, he reminded her softly. Flynn, she echoed, withdrawing her hand and trying to ignore the lingering warmth of his touch. As he mounted his horse to leave, Flynn tipped his hat to her. My sister will be pleased. As am I. The sincerity in his voice stayed with Thea long after he had ridden away into the night. Was it possible that the offer was exactly what it seemed, a legitimate job opportunity, nothing more? Or was there something else behind Flynn Blackwell's interest in bringing her to his ranch? Only time would tell. But as Thea returned to the boarding house to face the miner's good-natured teasing about her gentleman caller, she found herself looking forward to the change with a cautious optimism she hadn't felt in months. The week passed quickly, as Thea prepared to leave the Lucky Strike. The miners presented her with a hand-carved wooden spoon as a parting gift, and even Mr. Simmons gruffly admitted she'd been better than most at keeping the place running. Her replacement, a widow named Mrs. Corby, seemed capable enough, though her first batch of biscuits drew complaints from the men who had grown accustomed to Thea's light, fluffy creations. On her final morning, Thea packed her few belongings, clothes, books, the small silver locket that had been her mother's, into a single trunk. As promised, Flynn arrived to transport her to the Rocking Bee, this time with a wagon rather than on horseback. Ready for your new adventure? He asked as he loaded her trunk. Thea glanced back at the Lucky Strike boarding house. It hadn't been much of a home, but it had been a sanctuary of sorts, a place where she had proven her worth beyond her appearance. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied. The Rocking Bee was a 12-mile ride from Silver City, situated in a lush valley where Cottonwood Creek provided year-round water, a rarity in the often parched New Mexico territory. As they crested the final hill, Thea caught her breath at the sights spread below them. The ranch house was substantial, a 2-story structure of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around its front. Nearby stood a large barn, bunkhouse, smithy, and various outbuildings that comprised a working cattle operation. Beyond, green pastures stretched to distant hills, dotted with the red-brown forms of grazing cattle. It's beautiful, Thea said honestly. Flynn's chest swelled visibly with pride. My father started with nothing but 100 acres and 20 head of cattle. Now we run over 2,000 head on 15,000 acres. He clicked to the horses, urging them down the slope toward home. Pa died 2 years ago, left the ranch to me and Tessa. She handles the books and the house. I manage the cattle and the men. It's quite an operation, Thea observed. Been challenging lately, Flynn admitted. Droughts got everyone worried and cattle prices aren't what they were, but we'll manage. Always do. As they approached the ranch house, a slender woman with honey blonde hair emerged onto the porch. She waved enthusiastically before hurrying down the steps to meet them. "You must be Thea," she called as Flynn brought the wagon to a halt. "I'm Tessa Blackwell. Welcome to the Rocking Bee." Tessa was perhaps a year or two older than Thea, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother and a warm smile that immediately put Thea at ease. Unlike many women upon first meeting Thea, Tessa didn't flinch or look away from her scar. Instead, she took both of Thea's hands in hers with genuine welcome. "I can't tell you how glad I am you've come," Tessa continued. "Between the ledgers and the laundry and trying to keep these cowboys fed, I was about at my wits' end." "Happy to help," Thea replied, finding herself smiling in response to Tessa's enthusiasm. "Flynn, take Thea's trunk to the blue room," Tessa instructed her brother. "I'll show her around the house." The Rocking Bee's main house was spacious and well-appointed, though not ostentatious. The kitchen was a cook's dream, with a massive iron stove, ample counter space, and a pantry stocked with supplies that would make even Mr. Hendricks envious. The dining room could seat 20 comfortably, and the sitting room featured actual upholstered furniture, a luxury Thea hadn't enjoyed since leaving her teaching position. Her bedroom, the blue room as Tessa called it, was on the second floor, with a view of the distant mountains from its window. A proper bed with a feather mattress, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a chest of drawers, and even a small writing desk occupied the space. After months in the tiny back room at the Lucky Strike, it felt like a palace. "I hope it's suitable," Tessa said, watching Thea's reaction. "It's more than suitable," Thea assured her. "It's lovely." Tessa beamed. "Wonderful. I'll leave you to get settled then. Dinner's at 6 just for the 3 of us tonight. The men eat at the bunkhouse, but you'll start cooking for them tomorrow. Rest now, and we can discuss menus and schedules over dinner." Left alone, Thea unpacked her few possessions, placing her clothes in the chest of drawers and her books on the small shelf beside the desk. The room was so clean and inviting that she felt almost out of place in it, as though her scarred presence somehow diminished its charm. She shook off the thought. The Blackwells had hired her for her skills, not her appearance. If they were uncomfortable with her scar, they hid it well. Better than well, neither had so much as blinked at the sight of it. At dinner, Thea learned more about the ranch and its operations. Tessa was as talkative as Flynn was reserved, filling the silences with stories of ranch life and local gossip. "The Simmons brothers have been rivals since childhood," she explained as they enjoyed Tessa's beef stew. "Abel runs the Lucky Strike and Ezra owns the livery in town. Haven't spoken in 15 years, if you can imagine. Something about a woman, I believe." "Tessa," Flynn admonished gently. "Miss Randall doesn't need to hear all the town's scandals on her first night." "Oh, but they're the most entertaining part of Silver City," Tessa said with a wink at Thea. "And please, it's just Thea now. We're not formal here, are we, Flynn?" Flynn's gaze met Thea's across the table. "Not unless Thea prefers it." "Thea is fine," she assured them both. "Good, then you must call me Tessa. Miss Blackwell makes me sound like an old spinster," Tessa declared. "You're 25, Flynn said dryly. "Hardly a spinster in these parts." "Practically ancient for an unmarried woman," Tessa retorted. though I've turned down 3 proposals this year alone. Because you're too picky, Flynn said, but his tone was affectionate. Because I haven't found a man worth giving up my independence for, Tessa corrected, then turned to Thea. What about you? Was there someone before? She hesitated, clearly unsure how to reference Thea's accident. Before the stagecoach crash, Thea supplied, surprising herself with her directness. No, I was focused on teaching. And now, Tessa asked. Thea met her gaze steadily. Now I'm focused on building a new life, one day at a time. Flynn's expression was unreadable as he studied her, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. A sensible approach. Later that evening, as Thea prepared for bed, she found herself drawn to the window. The moon hung full and bright over the rocking bee, silvering the landscape in its gentle light. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of a lone rider, Flynn. She guessed making a final check of the property before retiring. There was something so peaceful about this place, so removed from the whispers and stares of Silver City. Perhaps here, among the straightforward cowboys and the honest work of ranch life, she could truly begin anew. For the first time since the accident, Thea fell asleep without touching her scar. Life at the Rocking Bee quickly settled into a routine. Thea rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hand's hearty fare of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee to fuel their long days on horseback. After breakfast, she would plan the midday and evening meals, make bread, and handle various kitchen tasks while Tessa managed the household accounts and correspondence. The Cowboys, a diverse group of men ranging from grizzled veterans to fresh-faced boys barely old enough to grow a beard, were initially curious about the new cook with the scarred face. But after their first meal, a supper of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler, their curiosity was replaced by enthusiastic appreciation for her culinary skills. "Miss Thea," declared Hank, the oldest of the hands, "you could make a fortune cooking for kings and queens." "I'm quite content cooking for cowboys, Mr. Wilson," Thea replied with a smile. It was true. The Rocking Bee Cowboys were a respectful lot, removing their hats in her presence and watching their language when she was near. Unlike the miners, who had been a rougher group, these men seemed genuinely concerned with making a good impression. "Flynn doesn't tolerate disrespect," Tessa explained when Thea commented on their behavior. "He fired 2 hands last year for inappropriate remarks about the girl who delivers our mail." Flynn himself remained something of a mystery to Thea. He was unfailingly polite, always greeting her with a smile and often complimenting her cooking, but he maintained a certain distance that Thea couldn't quite interpret. He rose earlier and retired later than anyone else on the ranch, working alongside his men during the day and handling paperwork in his small office after dinner. "My brother takes his responsibilities seriously," Tessa said one afternoon as they prepared vegetables for stew. "Too seriously sometimes. He hasn't taken a day off since Pa died." "He seems very dedicated," Thea observed neutrally. Tessa shot her a knowing look. "He's also single and handsome, and the owner of the most prosperous ranch in the county." Thea felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I hadn't noticed." "Liar," Tessa teased gently. "Every woman in Silver City has noticed Flynn, but he's too busy for courting, or so he claims." "A wise decision," Thea said, focusing intently on peeling potatoes. "Running a ranch this size must require his full attention." Tessa's expression softened. "You know, not all men are as shallow as you might think. My brother, for instance, he sees people for who they truly are." Before Thea could respond to this loaded statement, the kitchen door swung open and Flynn himself entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Ladies," he greeted them. Something smells wonderful. Beef stew for dinner, Tessa replied. What brings you in so early? Telegram from Santa Fe, Flynn said, pulling a yellow paper from his pocket. The Cattlemen's Association is holding an emergency meeting about the drought. I'll need to ride out tomorrow. How long will you be gone? Tessa asked, frowning. 3 days, maybe 4. Flynn's gaze shifted to Thea. I was hoping you might pack some provisions for the journey. Your bread keeps better than anything from the Silver City bakery. Of course, Thea agreed. I'll prepare something this evening. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, there's a social at the church on Saturday. I'd planned to escort you both, but I'll likely still be in Santa Fe. Oh, we can still attend, Tessa said brightly. Can't we, Thea? Thea froze. A social meant people from town, people who knew her, who had seen her transition from respected schoolteacher to disfigured cook. People who had called her worthless. I think I'll stay here, she said carefully. There's preserving to be done before the apricots spoil. Nonsense, Tessa declared. The preserving can wait. You haven't been to town in weeks. For good reason, Thea murmured. Flynn's expression darkened. Has someone been unkind to you in town, Thea? The genuine concern in his voice caught her off guard. Nothing I can't handle, she assured him. That's not what I asked, Flynn persisted gently. Thea sighed, setting down her knife. People talk. They always do. I've just found it easier to avoid giving them something to talk about. By hiding away, Tessa asked softly. By choosing my battles, Thea corrected. Flynn studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes intense. You know what my father used to say? The only opinion that matters is your own and those of the people who truly care for you. The rest is just noise. Wise words, Thea acknowledged. Think about the social, Flynn suggested. It would do you good to get out, and Tessa enjoys these gatherings. After Flynn left, Tessa turned to Thea with a determined expression. We're going to that social, and we're going to have a wonderful time. And if anyone says a single unkind word, they'll have me to answer to. Despite her misgivings, Thea found herself smiling at Tessa's fierce loyalty. Your brother would say that's the Blackwell spirit talking. Flynn's not the only one who inherited Pa's stubborn streak, Tessa agreed with a grin. Now, help me finish these potatoes. I want to show you the dress I'm planning to wear on Saturday. The next morning, Flynn departed for Santa Fe with a pack of provisions that Thea had carefully prepared. 2 loaves of crusty bread, a jar of preserves, smoked beef, and a small bundle of oatmeal cookies that she'd baked especially for the journey. This is more than I need, Flynn protested when she presented him with the package. Better too much than too little, Thea replied. The road to Santa Fe can be unpredictable. Flynn's smile was warm as he secured the provisions to his saddle. Thank you for your thoughtfulness, Thea. She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under his appreciative gaze. It's my job. Is it your job to remember that oatmeal cookies are my favorite? He asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Thea felt a blush creeping up her neck. Tessa mentioned it. Did she? Flynn looked amused. My sister has a habit of sharing information she thinks might be useful. Before Thea could respond to this cryptic statement, Flynn swung onto his horse with practiced ease. Take care while I'm gone, and consider the social. It would please Tessa greatly. I'll think about it, Thea promised. She watched him ride away, a tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun, and felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been longing. Ridiculous, she chided herself. Flynn Blackwell was her employer, nothing more. Any attention he paid her was simply his natural courtesy, the same consideration he showed to everyone who worked for him. But as she returned to the kitchen to begin her day's work, Thea found herself wondering what it might be like if his interest were more personal. Before she could explore that dangerous line of thought, she firmly redirected her attention to the bread dough rising on the counter. Feelings had no place in her new life. She had learned that lesson the hard way. The day of the church social arrived clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Thea had ultimately yielded to Tessa's persistent encouragement and agreed to attend, though her stomach churned with anxiety as they prepared. "You look lovely," Tessa declared as Thea emerged from her room in her best dress, a dark blue cotton with white piping that she had carefully modified to include a higher neckline and slightly fuller sleeve on the scarred side of her face. "I look presentable," Thea corrected, adjusting her bonnet to better shadow her face. Tessa reached out and gently tilted the bonnet back. "You don't need to hide, Thea. You're beautiful, scar or no scar." Thea's throat tightened unexpectedly at the simple kindness. "You're a good friend, Tessa Blackwell." "The best," Tessa agreed with a wink. "Now come on. The wagon's ready, and I promised Mrs. Porter we'd help set up the refreshment table." The social was held on the church grounds, where tables had been arranged beneath the shade of large cottonwood trees. Colorful bunting and paper lanterns added a festive air, and already a crowd had gathered, families from town and surrounding ranches, dressed in their Sunday best and eager for an afternoon of community and conversation. Thea felt the stares as soon as they arrived. Subtle glances, quickly averted eyes, whispers behind hands. The familiar sensation of being a curiosity, an object of pity, washed over her with depressing familiarity. "Miss Randall," Mrs. Hargrove approached, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "What a surprise to see you here." "I heard you'd left town." "I work at the Rocking Bee now," Thea replied evenly. "As our cook," Tessa interjected, linking her arm through Thea's possessively. "And she's absolutely indispensable. I don't know how we managed before." Mrs. Hargrove's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, how?" "Fortunate for you, Miss Randall." "Fortune has nothing to do with it," Tessa said, her smile hardening at the edges. "Skill and character, rather. Now, if you'll excuse us, we promise to help with the refreshments." As they walked away, Thea squeezed Tessa's arm gratefully. "You didn't need to defend me." "I wasn't defending you," Tessa replied. "I was stating facts. That woman," she broke off, shaking her head. "Never mind, let's enjoy ourselves, shall we?" Despite her initial discomfort, Thea found herself relaxing as the afternoon progressed. The townspeople were generally polite, if not overly warm, and the ranch families were genuinely friendly. She even encountered some of her former students, who greeted her with unfeigned delight and peppered her with questions about life at the Rocking Bee. It was nearing dusk, the lanterns casting a golden glow over the gathering, when Thea overheard the conversation that would change everything. She had stepped behind a tree to secure a loosened button on her shoe, when the voices drifted to her Mrs. Hargrove and Mrs. Donovan, unaware of her presence just a few feet away. "The poor girl," Mrs. Donovan was saying. "Working as a cook when she was educated to be a teacher, such a waste of potential." "What else could she do?" Mrs. Hargrove replied. "No man will marry her with that face, and teaching is out of the question." The children were having nightmares. Still, to end up at the Rocking Bee. "I wonder what Flynn Blackwell is thinking, bringing a woman like that into his home." Mrs. Hargrove's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Well, some men aren't particular about appearance when it comes to certain arrangements, and a disfigured woman with limited options might be grateful enough to Eleanor." Mrs. Donovan sounded scandalized, but not entirely disapproving. "Surely you don't think? I'm only saying that a woman in her position might accept conditions that a respectable girl would refuse, and the Blackwell siblings are oddly protective of her." The implication was clear, and it struck Thea like a physical blow. Is that what people thought? That she had secured her position through some immoral arrangement with Flynn? That she was so worthless, so desperate that she would sell herself for security? Before she could decide whether to confront the women or flee, another voice joined the conversation, deep, male, and unmistakably angry. Mrs. Hargrove, Mrs. Donovan, Flynn. He had returned early from Santa Fe. Thea remained frozen behind the tree, heart hammering in her chest. Mr. Blackwell, Mrs. Hargrove greeted him, her tone instantly shifting to saccharine sweetness. We were just discussing. I heard exactly what you were discussing, Flynn interrupted, his voice icily controlled. And I suggest you find a new topic of conversation, one that doesn't involve slandering a woman whose character you clearly know nothing about. We meant no offense, Mrs. Donovan began. Didn't you? Flynn's question hung in the air like a challenge. Let me be perfectly clear, ladies. Miss Randall is employed at the Rocking Bee because she is exceptionally skilled at her work. She lives in my home because she is a valued employee and a friend to my sister. And she deserves your respect, not your gossip. Of course, Mrs. Hargrove stammered. We didn't mean to suggest. You suggested exactly what you intended to suggest, Flynn cut in. And in doing so, you've revealed far more about your own character than Miss Randall's. There was a moment of tense silence before Mrs. Donovan spoke again, her tone stiff. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Blackwell, I believe my husband is looking for me. Thea heard their retreating footsteps, followed by a heavy sigh from Flynn. She should have revealed herself then, thanked him for his defense, but shame kept her rooted to the spot. Shame that such rumors existed, shame that he had been subjected to them because of her presence in his home. She waited until she was certain Flynn had walked away before emerging from her hiding place, her legs unsteady beneath her. She needed to leave now, before she encountered anyone else, before the humiliation of the evening could grow any deeper. Tessa found her minutes later already seated in their wagon. Thea, there you are, I've been looking everywhere. Tessa's cheerful expression faltered as she took in Thea's pale face. What's wrong? Has something happened? I'd like to go back to the ranch, Thea said quietly. But the dancing hasn't even started, please, Tessa. Thea's voice cracked slightly. I need to leave. Something in her tone must have conveyed her distress, for Tessa immediately climbed into the wagon beside her. Of course, we'll go right away. They rode in silence for several minutes before Tessa spoke again. Will you tell me what happened? Thea stared straight ahead, watching the road unfurl before them in the gathering darkness. I heard Mrs. Hargrove and Mrs. Donovan talking about me, about why I'm at the Rocking Bee. Understanding dawned on Tessa's face. Those miserable, small-minded, she broke off, taking a deep breath. What exactly did they say? Enough to make me realize I should never have come to the social or to the Rocking Bee. Tessa's head snapped toward her. What are you talking about? I can't stay, Tessa. Not if my presence is causing rumors about your brother, about your family. That's ridiculous, Tessa declared. Flynn doesn't care a whit what those old busybodies think. But I do, Thea said softly. I care that my scarred face and limited options have led people to assume the worst about both of us. Tessa was quiet for a long moment, her grip tightening on the reins. Flynn defended you, didn't he? Thea looked at her in surprise. How did you know? Because I saw him arrive and I saw him looking for you, Tessa explained. And because I know my brother, he wouldn't stand for anyone speaking ill of you. That's the problem, Thea said. He shouldn't have to defend me. Friends defend each other, Tessa replied simply. And you are our friend, Thea. More than that, you're part of the Rocking Bee now. We take care of our own. The words were kind, but they couldn't dispel the cloud of shame that had settled over Thea. She had come to the Rocking Bee seeking a fresh start, a place to rebuild her dignity. Instead, she had become a source of scandal, a burden to the Blackwells in ways she'd never intended. By the time they reached the ranch, Thea had made up her mind. She would give notice in the morning. It was the only honorable course of action. But when dawn broke, it was Flynn who found her first, already at work in the kitchen with a batch of biscuits in the oven. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she had brewing on the stove. "I couldn't sleep," Thea admitted, keeping her focus on the dough she was kneading for the day's bread. Flynn leaned against the counter, studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. "I saw you at the social yesterday, before you left." Thea's hands stilled on the dough. "I saw you too." "Then you heard?" "Yes." She finally looked up at him. "And I want you to know that I'll be leaving the Rocking Bee. I've already written to Mr. Henderson at the Mercantile to inquire about positions in Silver City." Flynn's expression hardened. "You're quitting because of town gossip." "I'm leaving because my presence here is causing problems for you and Tessa," Thea corrected. "Problems?" Flynn set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "The only problem I have is with small-minded people who value appearance over character. And if you leave because of their gossip, Thea, they win." "This isn't about winning or losing," Thea insisted. "It's about doing what's right for the Rocking Bee. For your reputation, my reputation can withstand a few wagging tongues," Flynn interrupted. "But the ranch needs you. Tessa needs you." He paused, his voice softening. "I need you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning Thea was afraid to interpret. "You need a cook," she clarified cautiously. Flynn shook his head, taking a step closer to her. "I need you, Thea Randall. Your skills in the kitchen, yes, but also your quiet strength. Your kindness to my sister. Your dignity in the face of cruelty." Another step, bringing him within arm's reach. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Thea's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "A scarred face," she whispered. "No," Flynn said firmly. "I see a woman of extraordinary courage, someone who lost everything and started again without complaint or self-pity. I see intelligence in your eyes, grace in your movements, gentleness in your smile." His voice dropped lower. "I see beauty, Thea, not despite your scar, but including it, because it's part of who you are, a survivor." Tears stung Thea's eyes. No one had spoken to her with such genuine admiration since the accident. No one had looked at her the way Flynn was looking at her now, as though she were something precious. "The first day I met you," Flynn continued, "in Hendrick's store, I thought you were the most striking woman I'd ever seen. When I learned you were working at the Lucky Strike, I knew I had to find a way to bring you to the Rocking Bee. Not out of pity, but because I wanted to know you better." "Why?" Thea asked, her voice barely audible. Flynn smiled, reaching out to gently touch her cheek, the scarred one. His fingers traced the line from temple to chin with a reverence that made her breath catch. "Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were priceless," he said simply. The word struck her like a thunderbolt. Priceless. Not worthless as the town gossips had labeled her. Not damaged goods or a burden or an object of pity. Priceless. "Flynn," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say, but Flynn was already stepping back, his hand dropping to his side. "I'm not asking for anything, Thea. I just want you to stay, to give the Rocking Bee, to give us a chance." Before she could respond, the kitchen door swung open and one of the ranch hands entered, calling out a greeting that shattered the intimate moment. Flynn nodded to Thea, his eyes conveying what words couldn't, before turning to address the cowboy's question about the day's work assignments. Left alone with her thoughts, Thea's mind whirled. Flynn Blackwell saw her as priceless, not a burden, not a charity case. Priceless. The word echoed in her mind as she finished preparing breakfast, as she served the hungry cowboys, as she went about her morning tasks. Priceless. Could it be true? Could she be valued for who she was, not pitied for what had happened to her? The question followed her through the day, tugging at her heart and challenging the walls she had built around herself since the accident. That evening after dinner, as Tessa retired early with a headache, Thea found herself alone on the porch, watching as twilight painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. The sound of footsteps alerted her to Flynn's approach. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Thea shook her head, making room for him on the wooden bench. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," Thea finally said. Flynn turned toward her, his face half in shadow. "And? I'd like to stay," she said softly, "if the offer still stands." Relief visibly washed over his features. "It does. But I need you to understand something," Thea continued. "I won't be the cause of scandal for your family. If my presence here continues to generate gossip, I'll have to leave for your sake and Tessa's." "Let me worry about the gossips," Flynn said firmly. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough. And in the meantime—" Flynn's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "In the meantime, we give them something real to talk about." Thea's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Flynn said, his voice low and serious, "that I'd like to court you properly, Thea Randall, if you'll allow it." The world seemed to still around them as Thea absorbed his words. Court her? Flynn Blackwell, the most eligible bachelor in the county, wanted to court her. "People will talk more than ever," she warned. "Let them. They'll say you're settling, that you could do better." Flynn's grip on her hand tightened. "There is no better, Thea, not for me." "How can you be so certain?" she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied simply. "I know that you're kind and strong and resilient. I know that you make the best biscuits in the territory, and that you hum when you think no one's listening. I know that you read poetry by lamplight and leave food out for the stray cat that haunts our barn." Thea stared at him in surprise. "How did you—" "I notice things," Flynn said with a small smile, "especially things about you." A warm flutter stirred in Thea's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'm not the woman I was before the accident," she said softly. "I don't want that woman," Flynn replied. "I want you exactly as you are." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Thea felt the last of her resistance crumbling. Perhaps it was time to stop defining herself by what she had lost and start embracing what might be gained. "Yes," she said finally. "You may court me, Flynn Blackwell." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll make you a promise, Thea. Every day, for as long as you'll let me, I'll remind you of your worth." "I may need a lot of reminding," she admitted. Flynn leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "I'm a very patient man." And then, with infinite gentleness, he kissed her, not on her unmarked cheek as she expected, but directly on her scar, his lips brushing the raised line from temple to chin in a gesture of acceptance, so profound that tears sprang to Thea's eyes. When he finally pulled back, his own eyes were suspiciously bright in the starlight. "Priceless," he whispered. "Absolutely priceless." In that moment, beneath the vast New Mexico sky, Thea began to believe it might be true. True to his word, Flynn began his courtship with deliberate public gestures that left no doubt about his intentions. He escorted Thea to Sunday services, proudly walking beside her down the church aisle and introducing her to ranchers and townspeople alike as Miss Randall, the remarkable woman who keeps the rocking bee running smoothly. The reactions were as varied as they were predictable. Some, like Mrs. Hargrove and her circle, could barely conceal their disapproval behind tight smiles and whispers. Others, particularly the working folks of Silver City who had known hardship themselves, showed genuine warmth. And a surprising number seemed simply curious about the relationship between the handsome rancher and the scarred schoolteacher turned cook. "They'll get used to it," Flynn assured Thea after a particularly awkward encounter with the banker's wife, who had practically dragged her husband away when Flynn attempted to introduce Thea. "People fear what they don't understand. And what is there to understand about us?" Thea asked, attempting lightness despite the sting of the woman's rejection. Flynn's expression grew serious. "That some people see beyond the surface, that true value isn't in a perfect face or a prestigious position." He squeezed her hand. "That love recognizes worth where others see only damage." Love. The word hung between them, unacknowledged yet impossible to ignore. They had not spoken of love directly, though Flynn's actions spoke volumes. The wildflowers left on her kitchen work table each morning. The book of poetry he'd ordered from Santa Fe because she'd mentioned admiring the author. The way he sought her out each evening just to hear about her day. At the ranch, their relationship blossomed under Tessa's enthusiastic approval. "I've never seen Flynn so happy," she confided to Thea one afternoon as they preserved peaches. "He whistles when he works now." "Flynn, whistling?" Thea smiled, trying to hide her pleasure at the thought. "He's been very kind." "Kind?" Tessa snorted. "My brother isn't being kind, Thea. He's falling in love with you, probably already has." The words sent a thrill of both joy and terror through Thea. Joy because her own feelings for Flynn had grown deeper with each passing day. Terror because a small part of her still couldn't quite believe that someone like him could truly love someone like her, not with the unconditional commitment that lasted beyond initial attraction. But Flynn seemed determined to prove her fears unfounded. As summer faded into fall, he included her in every aspect of ranch life, teaching her to ride again after she admitted the accident had left her wary of horses, showing her the operation of the ranch, and discussing business decisions as though her opinion mattered as much as his own. "You have a good head for figures," he remarked one evening as they reviewed the cattle ledgers together. "Better than mine." "I was a teacher," Thea reminded him. "And yet you never speak of going back to it," Flynn observed carefully. "Do you miss teaching?" Thea considered the question. "I miss the children," she admitted. "Their excitement when they grasped a new concept, their trust." Flynn studied her thoughtfully. "The new settlement north of here needs a teacher. Peterson mentioned it when he was delivering supplies last week. They've built a schoolhouse but can't find anyone willing to make the journey." Thea's heart quickened. "Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. Blackwell?" she teased, though there was a hint of real anxiety behind her words. Flynn reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. "Just the opposite. I'm suggesting that perhaps you could teach there a few days each week if you wished. It's only an hour's ride. And who would cook for your hungry cowboys while I'm away?" "Tessa managed before you came," Flynn said. "She could manage a day or two each week." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I just want you to be fulfilled, Thea, to use all your gifts." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, the way he had considered her happiness, her potential touched Thea deeply. "I'll think about it," she promised. As fall deepened, bringing cooler days and frost-tinged mornings to the high desert, the rocking bee prepared for the annual cattle drive to the railhead at Las Cruces. Flynn would be gone for 2 weeks, the longest they would be separated since Thea had come to the ranch. The night before his departure, they sat together on the porch swing, a blanket draped over their laps against the evening chill. The ranch was quiet, the cowboys having retired early in preparation for the long journey ahead. "I've something for you," Flynn said, reaching into his pocket. "Something to remember me by while I'm gone." "As if I could forget you," Thea replied with a smile. Flynn produced a small velvet pouch, placing it in her hand. Open it. Inside, Thea found a delicate silver pendant on a fine chain. The pendant was shaped like a star, simple but exquisitely crafted, with a small blue stone set at its center. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It was my mother's," Flynn explained, his voice soft with memory. "Pa gave it to her when they first came to this land. Said she was his guiding star in the wilderness." He took the necklace from her fingers and gestured for her to turn. "May I?" Thea nodded, gathering her hair to expose her neck. Flynn's fingers were warm against her skin as he fastened the clasp, his touch lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "There," he said as she turned back to face him. "Perfect." The pendant rested just below the hollow of her throat, the silver gleaming in the moonlight. Thea touched it reverently, understanding the significance of such a gift. "Flynn, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "Just know that wherever I am, whatever distance separates us, my heart remains here with you." The simple declaration undid her. After months of careful courtship, of gentle touches and respectful boundaries, Thea found herself overcome by the depth of her feelings for this man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it. "I love you," she whispered, the words escaping before she could consider their wisdom. "I love you, Flynn Blackwell." Flynn's breath caught audibly. Then his hands were cradling her face, both sides, the smooth and the scarred, with equal tenderness, and his lips were on hers in a kiss that spoke of longing finally fulfilled, of patience rewarded, of a future suddenly, brilliantly possible. When they finally broke apart, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you in Hendrick's store," he confessed. "Too soon to be reasonable, too deep to be denied." "Nothing about us has been reasonable," Thea said with a watery laugh. Flynn smiled, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Reason is overrated. Give me unreasonable love any day." His expression grew serious again. "I had planned to wait until after the cattle drive, to do this properly with a ring, but now I find I can't bear to leave without asking." Thea's heart began to race as Flynn slid from the swing to kneel before her on the rough wooden boards of the porch. "Thea Randall," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You are the strongest, most beautiful soul I have ever known. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" For a breathless moment, Thea couldn't speak. This moment, a proposal of marriage, an offer of forever, had seemed impossible after the accident. Yet here it was, presented by a man whose sincerity she couldn't doubt, whose love had been proven not in grand gestures but in daily reminders of her value. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Flynn, I will marry you." His answering smile was radiant as he rose to embrace her, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. Their laughter mingled in the cool night air, a joyful sound that seemed to echo across the sleeping ranch. "I'll return with a proper ring," Flynn promised when he set her down. "And when I do, we'll announce our engagement formally." "I don't need a ring," Thea protested. "This pendant is more than enough." "Nevertheless," Flynn insisted, "my wife will have a ring, even if she insists on keeping her position as the best cook in the territory." "Your wife," Thea repeated wonderingly. "It hardly seems real." Flynn's expression softened as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It's real, Thea, as real as this ranch, as real as my love for you." He kissed her again, gently. "And when people call you Mrs. Blackwell, they'll know exactly who you are, the woman who captured the heart of the most fortunate man in New Mexico territory." The cattle drive to Las Cruces was successful beyond Flynn's expectations, fetching a better price for the rocking bee herd than he had dared hope. But the financial windfall paled in comparison to the joy of returning home to Thea. She was waiting on the porch when the riders crested the final hill, her hand raised in greeting. Flynn spurred his horse ahead of the others, covering the remaining distance at a gallop. He dismounted in a cloud of dust and swept Thea into his arms, uncaring of the dirt and grime of 2 weeks on the trail. "Welcome home," she said when he finally released her. Flynn grinned, reaching into his pocket. "I brought you something." The ring was a band of gold set with a single diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it in rainbow patterns. Not ostentatious, but of undeniable quality, a ring that spoke of permanence and commitment. "It's perfect," Thea breathed as Flynn slipped it onto her finger. "Now it's official," he declared. "I've already spoken to Reverend Tompkins. He can marry us the first Sunday of December if that suits you." "So soon?" Thea asked, though her heart leapt at the thought. "Too soon?" Flynn's brow furrowed with concern. Thea smiled, shaking her head. "No. Not too soon at all." That evening, over a celebratory dinner with Tessa and the senior ranch hands, Flynn made the formal announcement of their engagement. The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic whoops of congratulation, raised glasses, and knowing smiles from those who had witnessed the courtship unfold. "About time," declared Hank Wilson, the oldest cowboy. "Been watching you moon over Miss Thea for months, boss." "Can't blame him," added another hand with a respectful nod to Thea. "Miss Randall's worth mooning over." Thea felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, but there was no mockery in it, only sincere appreciation from men who had come to respect her as much for her character as for her cooking. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silver City and the surrounding ranches. Most reactions were positive, congratulatory notes, small gifts, well wishes from neighbors and acquaintances. But there were exceptions. Mrs. Hargrove refused to sell me ribbon for the wedding decorations, Tessa reported indignantly after a trip to town. Said she depleted her stock, though I could see spools of it behind the counter. "It doesn't matter," Thea assured her. "Henderson's has perfectly good ribbon." But Flynn was less willing to dismiss the slight. "This has gone on long enough," he declared that evening. "It's time the good people of Silver City understand exactly where things stand." The following Sunday, Flynn and Thea attended services together as usual, but this time Flynn requested a moment to address the congregation before the final benediction. Standing at the front of the church, his hand firmly clasping Thea's, he surveyed the assembled townspeople with a steady gaze. "Many of you know that Miss Randall has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage," he began. "What you may not know is that I consider myself the most fortunate man in this territory, not despite Thea's scar, but regardless of it." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Thea felt her face flush, but Flynn's grip remained steady. Since the stagecoach accident, there have been those who have treated Thea as somehow diminished, as though her worth as a person, as a woman, was tied to the smoothness of her skin. His gaze traveled deliberately to Mrs. Hargrove and her circle. "I'm here to tell you that such thinking isn't just wrong, it's contemptible." "Flynn," Thea whispered, alarmed at the direction his speech was taking, but Flynn continued, his voice gaining strength. "Thea Randall is the most courageous, capable, compassionate person I have ever known. She has faced tragedy and cruelty with more dignity than most of us could muster in a lifetime. And every day, every single day, I am reminded of how precious she is." The church was utterly silent now, every face turned toward them. "I say this not to embarrass anyone," Flynn went on, his tone softening slightly, "but to make it perfectly clear that my future wife has my complete admiration and devotion. She is priceless to me, and I would consider it a personal favor if she were treated with the respect she deserves." When Flynn finally led Thea back to their pew, her legs were trembling so badly she feared they might give way. Never had anyone spoken for her so boldly, so publicly. Never had she felt so completely defended, so thoroughly claimed. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered as they sat. Flynn's expression was unapologetic. "I should have done it months ago." After the service, as they made their way through the churchyard, Thea braced herself for the cold shoulders and averted gazes that had become familiar. Instead, she found herself approached by Mrs. Miller, the wife of the bank president, whose daughter Thea had taught before the accident. "Miss Randall," the older woman began hesitantly. That is we." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "My Sarah has missed you terribly as a teacher. She speaks of you often." Thea blinked in surprise. "That's very kind of her to remember me. Not kind truthful, Mrs. Miller corrected. "You were an excellent teacher, and I want you to know that I've spoken to the school board about the possibility of you returning, perhaps for special lessons in literature and mathematics. The advanced students could benefit greatly." The offer was so unexpected that Thea could only stare at the woman. "I don't understand. I was told the parents had concerns. Some did," Mrs. Miller admitted. "Including myself, I'm ashamed to say. We worried about frightening the children." She glanced at Flynn, who stood silently by Thea's side. "But your fiancé reminded us of something important today, that character matters more than appearance, and that the lessons we teach our children by example may be the most important of all." Tears pricked at Thea's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I would be honored to consider the opportunity." As they walked away, Flynn squeezed her hand. "See, not everyone in this town is small-minded." "No," Thea agreed softly, "just human, flawed like the rest of us." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Tessa threw herself into planning with characteristic enthusiasm, transforming the rocking BTK's main house with festive decorations, despite Thea's protests that a simple ceremony would suffice. "Nonsense," Tessa declared. "My brother is marrying the woman he loves. That calls for a proper celebration." And a celebration it was. On the first Sunday of December, with a light dusting of snow on the distant mountains and clear blue skies overhead, Thea Randall became Thea Blackwell in the presence of nearly 100 guests, ranchers and cowboys, miners and townspeople, even a delegation from the settlement north of Silver City, where Thea had indeed begun teaching one day each week. She wore a gown of ivory satin with a high collar of Belgian lace, her hair adorned with small white flowers that Tessa had spent hours arranging. At Flynn's insistence, she wore no veil. "I want everyone to see your face," he had said, "exactly as I see it. Beautiful." When Reverend Tompkins pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn's kiss was both tender and triumphant, a public declaration of a love that had overcome prejudice and doubt. The cheers that erupted from the assembled guests suggested that, whatever private reservations some might still harbor, Flynn Blackwell's choice of bride was now a settled matter in Silver City. The celebration continued well into the evening, with a feast prepared by Tessa and the women of neighboring ranches, music provided by local fiddlers, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As twilight descended, Flynn led Thea away from the festivities to a waiting buggy decorated with ribbons and bells. "Where are we going?" Thea asked as Flynn helped her into the seat. "It's a surprise," he replied with a mysterious smile. "A wedding gift." They traveled for perhaps 20 minutes, following a track that led away from the main ranch buildings and into a sheltered valley that Thea had never visited. As they rounded a bend, a small cabin came into view, newly built, judging by the fresh-cut timber, with smoke curling invitingly from its chimney and lanterns glowing in its windows. "What is this place?" Thea asked as Flynn drew the buggy to a halt. "Our home," Flynn said simply. "If you approve." Thea stared at him in confusion. "But the ranch house will always be there," Flynn finished for her. "And we'll spend plenty of time there, but I thought perhaps we might want a place of our own, somewhere private. Somewhere we can build our life together without an audience of cowboys and my well-meaning but occasionally intrusive sister." The thoughtfulness of the gesture left Thea speechless. Flynn had understood without her having to explain, her lingering discomfort at being constantly observed, the pressure of living under the scrutiny of others, even those who meant well. "May I show you inside?" Flynn asked when she remained silent. Thea nodded, her throat too tight for speech. Flynn lifted her from the buggy, and in a swift movement that made her laugh in surprise, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. The interior of the cabin was simple but beautifully crafted, with polished wood floors, a stone fireplace, and furniture that Thea recognized as having been built by Amos Turner, Silver City's master carpenter. A table was set for two by the fire, laden with covered dishes that gave off enticing aromas. "Tessa stocked the pantry and prepared dinner," Flynn explained as he set Thea gently on her feet. "We won't have to return to the main house until you're ready." Thea turned slowly, taking in every detail of the cozy space. A comfortable sitting area with bookshelves already filled with volumes, a kitchen area with a new cast iron stove, and through a partially open door, she glimpsed a bedroom with a large four-poster bed covered in a handmade quilt. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning back to Flynn. "Absolutely perfect." His smile was tender as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "So are you Thea Blackwell?" The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "Say it again," she requested softly. Flynn stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "Thea Blackwell," he murmured, "my wife, my heart." And as he lowered his lips to hers, Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not as the scarred schoolteacher or the pitied victim, but as the woman Flynn Blackwell called priceless every day. In the years that followed, the phrase "priceless every day" became something of a motto between them, words whispered in moments of tenderness, declared in times of joy, repeated as a reminder during inevitable difficulties. Flynn never failed to speak them, in some form or another, as each day drew to a close. The rocking bee prospered under their joint stewardship. Flynn's instincts for cattle and land management, combined with Thea's organizational skills and head for figures, made them formidable business partners as well as loving spouses. When Tessa married the new doctor from Santa Fe in the spring following their wedding, the couple took over the main house while Flynn and Thea remained in their cabin, which gradually expanded to accommodate their growing family. Their first child, a son they named James after Flynn's father, arrived just over a year after their wedding, a robust, blue-eyed boy with his father's determined chin and his mother's thoughtful expression. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and then another son, Samuel, completed their family 3 years after that. From the beginning, Flynn insisted that Thea continue teaching, arranging for a young woman from town to help with the children on the days when she rode to the northern settlement. As the children grew old enough, they often accompanied her, proud to watch their mother instructing students of all ages in the one-room schoolhouse that had grown from a handful of pupils to nearly 30. The scar on Thea's face faded somewhat with the passing years, silvering as Dr. Sawyer had predicted, becoming less livid against her sun-bronzed skin. But more significantly, it ceased to be the first thing people noticed about her. To the residents of Silver City and the surrounding ranches, She became known not as the school teacher with the scar, but as Mrs. Blackwell, the teacher, or Flynn Blackwell's wife who runs the school up north. Even Mrs. Hargrove eventually thawed, particularly after Thea organized a successful fundraising effort to purchase new hymn books for the church, a project that brought together women from all corners of the community, regardless of social standing. "You've changed this town," Flynn remarked one evening as they sat on the porch of their now expanded cabin, watching their children play with the puppies born to their aging sheepdog. "Hardly," Thea demurred. "Silver City changes itself, one person at a time." Flynn shook his head, his once sandy hair now streaked with silver that Thea found endlessly attractive. "You've shown them what true worth looks like. Not in a flawless face or a perfect life, but in resilience, in kindness despite cruelty, in building something beautiful from brokenness." Thea smiled, leaning into the solid warmth of her husband's shoulder. At 42, Flynn Blackwell was still the handsome cowboy who had stolen her heart, though the years of ranch work had etched lines around his eyes and mouth, and occasional bouts of rheumatism troubled him after long days in the saddle. "We built it together," she corrected gently. Flynn kissed the top of her head. "We did it that." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the thunder of approaching hooves. James, now 15 and the image of his father, galloped into the yard on his bay gelding, his face alight with excitement. "Pa, Ma," he called, dismounting in a fluid motion that spoke of years spent on horseback. "Mr. Henderson's just delivered mail from back east. Uncle Robert's coming to visit with his whole family." Thea's heart leapt at the news. Her cousin Robert, who had moved to Boston years before the accident, had been corresponding regularly since her marriage, but had never made the journey west. His impending visit was cause for celebration indeed. As they gathered their children to share the news, Thea caught Flynn watching her with that familiar look of quiet adoration, the same look he had given her on their wedding day, on the birth of each of their children, on ordinary mornings over coffee and evenings by the fire. Later that night, after the children were asleep and they had retired to their bedroom, Thea found herself studying her reflection in the mirror as she brushed out her hair. At 40, her once auburn locks were beginning to show strands of silver, and fine lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes and mouth. The scar, while still visible, had softened with time, becoming simply another feature of the face she had come to accept as her own. Flynn appeared behind her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror as he wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Blackwell?" Thea leaned back against his chest, her brush stilling in her hand. "About how different things might have been, if not for a certain cowboy who insisted on seeing value where others saw only damage." Flynn turned her gently to face him, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You know what I see when I look at you now, after all these years?" Thea smiled, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it nonetheless. "What do you see, Flynn Blackwell?" His thumb traced the silvered line of her scar with the same reverence he had shown on that long-ago evening on the porch swing. "I see the mother of my children, the partner of my days, the love of my life." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I see a woman who is, and always will be, priceless beyond measure." And as his lips found hers in a kiss that held all the tenderness of their years together, and all the promise of years yet to come, Thea knew with absolute certainty that she was indeed priceless, not because Flynn had declared it, but because she had finally come to believe it herself. In Silver City, New Mexico territory, where the desert met the mountains and the past gave way to the future, Thea Randall Blackwell had discovered that worth wasn't determined by the smoothness of one's skin or the opinions of others. It was measured in love given and received, in challenges overcome, in a life fully and courageously lived. And that, perhaps, was the most priceless lesson of all.